What's up guys, BonsaiLad here. Today we are going to be bringing you the comprehensive guide to EHP. We're going to be breaking down the math, mechanics, and theory on how and why this build is effective late into Legends and high tier farming as well, despite the widely circulated myth that it is not viable. Now I personally farm from tier 17 to 18 for 7 to 5k waves at about 25-ish small Q per hour, and place in the top 1500 to 1000 position in Legends. I would be higher if not for the lack of CC. As of December 1st, I had CF plus 0 decorative toilet, though we are currently in the process of fixing that at this point. We're not going to be talking about econ at all today. That's a huge deep dive topic deserving of its own video. We're just going to be going over the stages of EHP progression. And while we're doing that, it'll be up to you to use discretion on when to invest in econ and when to invest in EHP power, or seek guidance if you're unsure. This video again is simply how to grow and utilize the EHP strategy effectively. In addition, quick announcement, we are opening our new Tower Discord server, the Tower Sanctuary, where you can come learn from unique Tower Trailblazers and join a community willing to hear your own innovative ideas. Even though it is run by the Holy Council of EHP, we welcome any and all kinds of builds and respectful players. The link will be below in the description. And one last point before we get started. The most important part of building a tower in the counter meta is to learn how to think for yourself, and specifically reasoning through why something is recommended or needed, and not just following a list of tasks that is given to you. Anyone that gives you direction or advice should be obligated to justify why that advice works in reality, not just on paper, and how it will make a difference to you and your unique situation, as every tower and build is different. More specifically, thinking through, I have this problem, but why do I have it, and what do I need to fix it, considering that this thing might work, and explaining why it's going to work. Being able to justify your own decisions will also help you grow your tower efficiently. Approaching theory crafting and build design with this kind of mindset will grow your knowledge and power faster than any guide out there, including mine. And I do the best to justify every point I make, with the math behind it or an in-game example to show how it works in practice. And though I can't always do it perfectly, I make the best effort I can to do so when I can. And with that out of the way, let's get started. So first up, the basic tenets of EHP are very simple. There are 5 of them, unlike the 2 that our glass cannon brethren have, which would be get more damage to kill things faster and get more CC so things take longer to reach you. At which point when they do, a hit means the run is over. Unlike glass cannon builds, however, EHP accepts that we will get hit, but for us, a hit is not the end because we can tank and regenerate through the damage. Starting off on rule 1, you must tank incoming damage. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you have less health than the enemy deals, you die and the game is over. So acquire health until you can tank the hits that you are receiving. Rule number 2, regen lost health before the next hit. Now this simply means it doesn't matter how large your health bar is, if you can't utilize it properly, the entire thing is wasted, because you will get chipped down slowly over time and eventually ground into dust. So acquire regeneration until you can heal through the chip damage and maintain your health bar. Now over time, these 2 priorities will flip back and forth as you grow your stats from health to regen and back to health again, and you will often notice a very large difference between tournaments and farming. As in farming, you have a 50 times regeneration multiplier from perks while also losing more than half of your HP at the same time. In tournament, you do not have this, so typically you'll end up needing massive regeneration for tournaments and decent amount of health for farming. Though this isn't always going to be the case, as sometimes you end up needing regeneration for both. So follow the rules. When you're dying to insta-kill, you need more health. When you're dying to chips, you need more regen. And that's how those 2 operate. Going back to rule number 3, acquire damage resistance. So damage resistance or damage reduction will reduce the damage that you have to tank. If enemies are doing less damage, you're receiving less damage and need to regen less damage, because there's less health lost and less health to be recovered. This helps both of those stats at the same time, but tends to be from sources that are harder to come by and often more expensive. And rule number 4, acquire time between hits, which is a fancy phrase for crowd control. Now just like glass cannon, CC is very important to EHP, though more so in the later stages. But when it matters, it's even more impactful because unlike glass cannon builds where it's either all or nothing, you stop the squares or you die, a partial success is still helpful for us, because when you spread out the time it takes for hits to land, your regeneration and health stretch further. Even though the numbers are the same, if a square hits you once every second versus once every 2 seconds, you can then regenerate twice as much health points in the time between attacks. In addition, it also spreads out shotgun blasts for scatters and black hole failures. So instead of getting hit by a bunch of scatter children at the same time, it might be spread over a second or two, which lowers the threshold of the insta-death spike. And of course, when you add in mischance, damage that doesn't exist is also damage that you don't have to tank or regenerate as well. In this panel of towers, the one on the left only has basic health and regeneration, the center one adds 50% defense for a damage reduction stat, and the right one adds slow aura mastery for a 50% delay between enemy attacks for a CC aspect. Each additional part increases the overall effective EHP, and as we continue to stack these effects on each other, the gains will scale exponentially. We'll end up discussing most of these over the course of the video. And lastly, Rule 5. Percent damage is infinite damage. This damage, unlike traditional sources, is linked to enemy HP or wave HP and scales to whatever wave you're on. Once you attain it, it lasts forever and never has to be upgraded, unlike the glass cannon builds that are always in search of the next big damage factor. For example, if an enemy loses 40% of its health to Smite, 50% to orbs, and 10% to a thorn hit, that enemy type will always die in that way and at that same time, regardless of wave health or wave damage, because the percent damage scales infinitely, and the only limitation to your build in this case is can you survive the time it takes to kill. EHP has a constant kill time rate that never changes, whereas glass cannon builds take slightly longer each wave until there's not enough damage, you get overwhelmed, and the run ends. You'll notice here that even though these bosses are thousands of waves apart, the damage percentages are roughly the same, because the EHP percent damage never changes. There are many different percent damage mechanics that we can use to clear enemies, and many of them can be combined together to solve whatever enemy problem you are facing. With the exception of certain Devo builds where hoarding is specifically involved, more percent damage is usually better. Try to start with getting thorns to 101% with basic module substats as a first step, to one-hit normal enemies and two-hit bosses before you unlock and upgrade the plasma cannon. We will of course be talking about most of these later, but anyway, with that out of the way, let's get started on the early game. At the start of the game, you're going to want to focus specifically on the first rule. Regen is still useful, but it has much less scaling at this stage and often struggles to keep up without spending substantial amount of coins into the workshop. You're going to want to focus on health, defense, dabs or defense absolute, and the recovery package chance and effectiveness. And this will carry you through the early stages very well. Defense percent and dabs can drop enemy damage to below 0, making you completely immune until the damage scaling goes above that number, at which point your health will begin to take damage over time and you'll slowly get chipped down. But once you unlock the recovery package, this allows you to receive regeneration that can overheal your health bar, slowly chip down, then package to overheal back again. This makes your regen mechanic in the early stages. Eventually, of course, the damage scaling will just overwhelm you, you'll die, you'll invest, repeat, and that is how early game EHP goes. One exception to this is if you manage to get a hold of the early game wormhole redirector. This particular module changes the math slightly because the wormhole allows regeneration overheal into the recovery package health bar, which massively increases its effectiveness with no additional investment. Essentially, it functions as an early version of the wall. Now in these videos here, it's basically the same stats per se, but the one on the right has the wormhole redirector, and you'll see how the health is regenerating into the overheal, where the one on the left is not. This allows you to utilize the health a lot more efficiently in a way that a non-wormhole redirector simply cannot function. You'll also notice initially you're completely immune to damage, because of the defense and dabs negating stats to 0, and then the one on the left slowly gets chipped down and dies a lot earlier, while the one on the right is still fighting for its life. The more investment you get into it, the better this effect becomes. Once the early game process is complete, you will then start to work towards getting the wall. Now the wall is life. It literally brings life into this build and is the most important mechanic on the EHP side. The thing to note specifically is that the wall has its own health, regen, and overheal bar mechanic that stacks with the basic ones. So instead of a basic health bar with package overheal that cannot regen, you get a wall that is basic health times wall health times sharp fortitude bonus times wall fortification to get wall HP, where every single hit can be regenerated by base regen times wall regen times sharp fortitude bonus. Now this is orders of magnitude larger in health and regen that your base health can't even begin to comprehend that your wall can tank and regen through. It should be noted that the wall health module substat will add a 40% or more boost to your wall HP, depending on other wall investments at the time, so don't sleep too hard on that when working on the first rule. At the start, the wall acts more like a larger health pool that can fully utilize regeneration across its entire health bar, and this allows Rule 2 to activate, as all regen invested will fully apply to the entire wall, so anything that does not instantly kill the wall in one hit can be fully negated by regeneration all the way back up to full health. The above labs are the minimum recommendations to have before running with the wall, as a wall without its labs is entirely useless. You can go in with less, it'll just be harder, you can go in with more, and it'll be easier. And of course more is always better. An important point of note is sharp fortitude. After the release of SF, it became a mandatory aspect of the wall. I mean, you can run a wall without it, but you're going to have it to be competitive, because it adds so much value onto it. There are some people that ran the wall with level 3 on these labs that outperformed people without sharp fortitude that had 5 to 10 times the levels. On this slide, we have our basic wall math to help understand just how massive of an EHP power scale the wall is on its own. One is a tournament, one is a farm run. Note the effect of sharp fortitude as well. As you can see, the wall just seems to infinitely scale above what the basic tower can do. In tournament, I have 97 trillion per second regen, but because of wall regen multiplication mechanics, that's 3/4 of a Q, and you're able to just regen through a bunch of damage. Same as the farm on the right, this is just one of the things that you don't really grasp until you have it, which is why getting a wall established is such a high priority. This mechanic is why regeneration matters now, because there's much more scaling than there was before. When it comes to the mid-game, getting wall is the first step. You want to be earning about 500 billion coins a day, so you can typically afford the wall labs, because once again, a wall without labs is essentially useless. Some people will unlock the wall, claim the labs, then respec out of it, just so it doesn't mess with their farming, then work on them for a week or so as needed and reinvest in the wall to get it up and running again. While that's happening, you're still going to be keeping with the health and regen rules, working on health until you are chipped, working on regen until you are shotgunned. That never changes. The third thing that you're going to be doing, and the most painful of them all, is going to be playing in the FUD's casino for modules. Like I mentioned earlier, sharp fortitude. You can technically wall without it, but it is such a massive boost to everything that it will send you thousands of waves forward with almost no effort otherwise. You want to get it because it stacks wall health, wall regen, and Thorns Edition, and that all multiplies in with the base stuff. Prim C is another good one that you're going to want to get, because when it's ancestral, you get an 80% damage reduction for all things in Black Hole. That includes scatters, rays, the boss, all that other stuff that bothers you. Now when the black hole drops, you do of course lose that bonus until it comes back up, so getting the black hole permanent without slacking your farming setup is definitely ideal if that's a possibility. Then Pulsar Harvester, not good for longer runs with the recent nerf that makes it less effective after 100 skips, but for short runs, milestones, tournaments under 1,000, it can net you several extra 100 waves, and it's just an all-around good one to have. When it comes to module substat, there's a lot of different ways you can do them, but you want to focus on the critical stuff first. Defense percent, regen, wall health. Defense percent is one of those damage reduction things that will multiply together to make a massive effect on your build. You want to get that number to 98% as soon as you possibly can. With the relics that have dropped recently, you can get that without ancestral rolls on your subs, but anything you can do to bump that number up is great. You get a 50 times EHP buff from defense when it's at 98%. The regen stat is actually equal in value to fully maxing your basic regeneration lab, and a massive boost when chasing Rule 2, so that's a priority as well. Wall HP, like mentioned earlier, is a straight 40% or more boost to wall health. When it comes to your core, anything that allows Death Wave to grow faster, especially on shorter runs, is ideal. When you're running less than 1,000 waves in tournament or hitting a milestone, getting that number up higher faster is always good. Sometimes when your black hole is close to permanence, stuff for the black hole is also ideal, and later in the game, Poison Swamp for CC, which we'll talk about later. For generators, you obviously want EALS, because less damage taken means you can go further, and of course utility upgrades so you can get more ELAS faster in a run. For cannon, what we want is maximum projectiles. We don't care what the damage is on them, just that there's a lot, because more bullets is more knockback and increased smite, which, believe it or not, is one of the most important EHP upgrades in the game. Once we have developed our wall and stabilized ourselves in the early mid-game, we're then going to want to start to invest in what's called damage reduction multipliers. Now there are 6 in the game. Dabs is technically one, but it's more situation specific because it is not a flat percentage reduction, but an absolute number. So the more enemies enemy health scales, the less impact it has until eventually it becomes basically irrelevant, unless you're Xepher, who is taking it to the absolute extreme, of which we're very excited to see where that goes. All of these things will reduce damage by a percent value, and they stack together multiplicatively. And when you have them all maxed, as seen by the math, for every million damage dealt, you only receive 15. This matters because eventually your workshop will max, your workshop plus will get expensive, and it'll be much harder to grow your health and regen, as per rules 1 and 2. What damage reduction does is it has a multiplicative amplifier on both of those stats, so you can go further with less. A 50% reduction in damage doubles EHP effectiveness. A 98% reduction, like from a max defense, increases EHP effectiveness by 50 times. And a 99.857%, which is the inversion of 0.0015%, will give you a 67,000 times effective EHP boost. Now these things are harder to come by and a lot more expensive often, aside from defense, so you're not going to max them early, but it should be a goal at some point going into the mid and late game. It takes a long time, but it's absolutely worth it. You may notice that my wall health is several hundred times lower than the damage that enemies are giving me. This is going to be that damage reduction multiplier taking into effect. I have the max defense, max flamebot, chain thunder at 75%, max chronofield, so instead of being instantly killed by 42 big Q on a wall that only has 180 small Q, it's doing barely any damage. And this is where EHP power really comes from. If you can build your base health and regen to a point, and then apply this principle fully upgraded, you'll multiply that by 67,000 times, which pushes you into late game legends and late tier farming on its own. Moving on to the mid game. As always, we're going to continue with our wall and rules 1 and 2, building health until you chip, building regen until you shotgun. Eventually health and regen will slow down as the workshop maxes and workshop plus becomes expensive, and at this point we will then switch to damage reduction, because it adds that multiplicative value as mentioned earlier. Now there are several different mechanics that do this. Chronofield Plus gives you a 25% reduction when maxed in the lab. Flamebot gives 95% damage reduction to all tagged enemies, which it fires off a global tag every 5 seconds, hitting everything except fast ult when upgraded. However, you likely want to develop this after your golden bot and not sack your econ, unless you're specifically pushing for a milestone or tournament and are okay with losing 30 to 50% of your coins every week. Now Flamebot value is upgraded differently than Golden Bot or Amplify, where the latter is a sustained AoE that requires enemies to actively be in an active field for benefits to proc. The Flamebot is an instance tag, where anything touched by it receives a permanent debuff, meaning duration is essentially irrelevant. The bot range scales twice as fast as the other bots, meaning a few clicks into it will have it on par with the Golden Bot range. After that, your next priority is to get the cooldown to 5 seconds with metal and lab upgrades as fast as possible. This effect, combined with a higher range, results in a global tag approximately every real life second, essentially hitting almost all enemies except fast ults that pass through. Lastly, the damage reduction upgrade scales in a similar method to defense, with the last 2 clicks literally being more than 50% of the entire bot's value, as shown by these examples of varying Flamebot upgrades. Essentially at 89%, netting a 9x damage resist, and 95% netting a 20x damage resist. Getting those last 2 clicks is worth sacrificing something else in your bot upgrade. The third thing that we want to work on is going to be Chain Lightning Plus, or Smite with the Chain Thunder Lab. Now you're probably going to want to get GT Plus first, because Econ is king as most people say, but Smite will be the next one that you want for several different reasons. We have a lot of math here, but all of it is important. First of all, Smite is a percent health damage factor, so it does not care what the enemy's health is, it will deal a percent of that health as damage. Chain Thunder, on the other hand, is a lab that reduces enemy damage by 10% for every 6% of health lost to Chain Lightning or Chain Lightning Plus. So we use Smite to deal damage, and that lost health means that enemies deal less damage. It's a little convoluted, but it makes all of the basic enemies, protectors, rays, vampires, fasts, range, a lot less threatening. Points of note, Smite is a lot less effective on tanks and bosses and fleets because they have multiple wave health values in their health bar, so the Smite does less to them. But I personally think the smaller enemies are scarier, fast and range ults are deadly, because tank ult doesn't really do anything once you get a good enough wall and damage reduction, and the boss doesn't deal real damage either in the late game for us. In addition, Smite will also delete Generation 3, 4, and 5 scatters a lot faster. If you can get Smite to level 9, it deals 50% wave health damage, which instantly kills 3, 4, and 5, so that way it's a lot harder to get shotgunned. In addition, it also helps deal with other elites, reducing the amount of times Raid will shoot you and dropping vampires faster so they're less likely to get tagged by commanders and become God. An important point of note that will be touched on later is that a single permanent poison swamp will fully wrap around the wall, and the stun attached to its lab can stun scatter children the moment they spawn, allowing Smite to delete them before they can even attack you, further negating the shotgun effect. Obviously 2 swamps is better, though there may be other stone priorities for our particular build that take precedence. At this point of the game, you're going to start to unlock Masteries and Assists, and there are a few points of note to harp on here. Masteries are essentially the gateway into consistent legends. They're massive power spikes for both builds, EHP and Glass Cannon, and where Glass Cannon has their damage, super tower, and demon mode, we have second win, regen, health, and defense. For tournaments, regen and defense are a lot more limited from lack of perks, so adding a 50x multiplier to the regen value and 7% onto your defense is a massive power spike for EHP. And as always, health is good because the more health you have, the more you can tank. Masteries are obviously good in farms as well. The only points of note as for labs go is when you get second win mastery, you have to have the second win recharge lab maxed. Otherwise it procs once, goes for 400 waves, and then goes away forever. And you want to be able to chain recycle that indefinitely. So second win proc, regen buff, falls off, second win proc, regen buff for as long as you need to go. Now after getting Masteries, a little while down the road, right before the endgame, assist mods are the next target on the horizon. Obviously health-based builds will want armor first, as cannon serves little purpose for us at this time. Generators are for econ, and core means a lot less at this point. The armor mod with an OA assist is ideal, and the ancestral unique stat, which I know is 3600 stones, is a huge power buff as well. It creates a wall of electrons that shreds scatters, shreds rays down to one hit kill by wall thorns, and in addition also significantly weakens commanders because they sit out of range and aren't targeted, but the electrons will fly through and eventually grind them into dust until they can be executed. It is an expensive upgrade for sure, but it really does pay off. Now at this point, we're typically flipping between champs and legends, though with the addition of masteries and eventually assists, it'll be more than enough to keep you there, and once you're stable, you then begin the endgame. At this point, Rule 4 comes into play, which is the crowd control. CC is much more important to EHP than Glass Cannon builds because unlike damage, where anything less than perfection is defeat, a partial success still helps us. Delays between attacks means that more regen occurs before the next hit, increasing effective regen, as well as decreasing the density of shotguns, as the damage is spread out over a larger time and less likely to spike into an insta-kill, as well as the mischance, in that damage that does not hit simply does not exist at all. On screen are a list of what I view as the CC priorities for EHP builds. Some builds may have a different priority order depending on where you started, what you have, the stones you buy, and this is where thinking for yourself comes into play as well. Maybe Swamp matters more to you than Chronofield Plus does to me, so ask yourself what your build needs and don't blindly just follow the list in order. Now for my tower, Permanent Black Hole was a first. This maintained the 80% PC reduction, which you should have as a primary or assist mod for most things at this point, and then after that, Chronofield 90% slow with knockback puts the brakes on the scatters so they fly in a lot slower. Slow Aura and Nuke Mastery increases time between attacks, further dampening the shotguns. Chronofield Plus, with the fancy toilet, is a massive time delay between attacks and keeps the scatter shotguns out longer, sometimes away entirely as the children spawn backwards and have to circle in longer before they hit me. And then Poison Swamp with Harmony Conductor and Landmine Mastery will give you a roughly 50% mischance for enemies hit by mines in the swamp to just not deal damage at all. Swamp Stun further weakens scatters by stunning children as they spawn so Smite can do its work. All these effects stack together. At this point, we are moving on to the late game. As always, we want to continue with building the wall and Rule 1 and 2 whenever possible. Build your health until you're chipped, build your regen until you're shotgunned. However, at this point of the game, we are heavily relying on CC to minimize the damage dealt to us, and our base EHP to negate the few things that make it through. Crowd control, like damage resist, stacks multiplicatively, so we want as much of it as we can get. Now this slide over here just rehashes the things we spoke on earlier. We want to make sure that we're getting our unique priority order of CC CC worked on, though one thing in particular that I do recommend is to invest in Chronofield Plus, because this allows OA to further shred elites and other enemies, and especially commanders. Going back to this slide here, we can see CC in action. We've got a lot of stuff coming in. We've got Rays being slowed. We got the boss being stunned by Swamp. We're getting ships hundreds of times with more damage than we should be able to take. However, because it's so spread out, you can see the regeneration actually keeping up with the damage to the point where my health ended at the same place that it began in the clip. This is an accumulation of all 5 laws of EHP, heavily invested all together, working to push me higher into the end. At this point, every little bit makes a difference, and it really does slowly add up over time. The last point that I want to touch on for the late game is a secret that a lot of people don't want to know, but eventually wave scaling will render all that you've done relatively ineffective. EHP and damage will both never keep up with the infinite scaling in high tiers, and in the end, crowd control will be the deciding factor that makes the difference. In Legends, the base EHP or damage you have for Glass Cannon will give you a guaranteed wave baseline, but crowd control will push you hundreds of waves further if your luck holds out long enough. Though EHP does have a significant advantage over Glass Cannon builds, in that the overcharge still does nothing to us, whereas commanders remain a problem for everyone, which is kinda cool at this point. Lastly, the endgame. No one has really taken EHP into the endgame, where they're top 500 in Legends and farming tier 19 and above without some type of hybrid aspect. So our knowledge on the subject is pretty thin. However, this trail will be blazed forward regardless, as my path has been full of people saying EHP doesn't work, you can't farm hard tiers, hit endgame milestones, or get more than 200 waves in Legends, back when it was only at tier 14+. Time has proven our faith in defensive builds was well founded, however. The Holy Council of EHP, which actually started as a group chat of like-minded players that became a show about patch notes from the EHP side, is currently working on some creative theories to bust through these final levels, and once we figure it out, we'll be sure to let you guys know. This whole journey into EHP may have started because people told me that health was pointless, and I responded with damage is optional. But I have made this build my own. I've enjoyed the journey along the way, and I do believe that I have helped inspire others to play the game the way they love, even if it's not the meta. I look forward to seeing how far we can push the health game, hopefully all the way into tier 21 and beyond. But in the meantime, this is BonsaiLad signing out. And remember, damage is optional, but the wall is forever.